We set aside this time each week for the mayor of Kansas City, and we're always grateful for his time on KCMO Talk Radio. Quinton Lucas joins us on 710 AM and 103.7 FM. And I want to start off, Mr. Mayor, good morning. I want to start off with this second-term goal of yours to help entrepreneurs in Kansas City. I think we'd all love to see Kansas City become more business-friendly, especially small business friendly, but you know as well as I do, you've been hearing it for 4 years. There's a lot of red tape, a lot of bureaucratic bloat, I would argue, in this town. So how do you cut through that to help the small business guy and gal?
You know, I appreciate the question, and good morning. The ways we do it, first of all, are removing certain requirements we've had at the city for years, but that no one knows why. For example, earlier this year, we got rid of an ordinance I introduced, employee liquor cards. The bar industry, our waiters and waitresses had said for years, this was a 1950s mob fighting era type of regulation that no longer had a public safety benefit. By removing that, we've removed $40 of cost for every waiter and server in Kansas City and thousands of dollars of costs often for restaurant owners and tavern owners who would cover it for folks. How many more types of things do we have with that? We have food handlers licenses in Kansas City. We have a number of other things that, yes, I agree with the fact that you want to make sure people get training, but there are lots of ways to do that these days rather than saying to somebody, you need to go down to City Hall, or you need to go down to the city business office, which is across from City Hall, the street, and, pay all of these costs to do these things. Those are just some of them. And, of course, on the permitting and zoning area, we catch it all the time, particularly when I talk to some of my friends up in the Northland who say, I can open in Liberty or Gladstone, right, and go through almost none of the red tape I'm facing in Kansas City. So we need to make things simpler. We need to, frankly, take a new look at how things are done, evaluate how we can do better. And I think this is just going to be one small part of it.
Yeah, I think, and I know you heard a lot of that at Politics in a Pint that we did a few months back on the permitting process in particular. So the next question on that front would be, why has it taken 4 years to get to this point when you've been hearing about this from business owners in this town for a long time? And why do you feel like now it can finally get done, and why it hasn't gotten done the last couple of years?
Right now I am not on a ballot, so I get to be as honest as possible and say this. I thought when I first got elected to city council back in 2015, I'd be able to change a lot of things very quickly. It does turn out sometimes you have to first understand the bureaucracy. Sometimes you have to realize where your path may be wrong. You have to come up with new solutions. And it takes a little bit of time to try to change the way that these things are done. So it does take time. There's not a magic wand approach, and we just do want to make sure. For example, I mentioned food handlers licenses. Nobody wants somebody who doesn't know, for example, to actually wash their hands before they start cooking all of your food to be handling everything. So how do we make sure that teaching is still done? How do we make sure we can hold people accountable while also making sure that we're not having these kind of unforeseen or unnecessary costs? And so that's why it takes time. I think, however, when I look at this new city council, particularly a new councilman from the Northland, Wes Rogers, he was a native of Platte City, he's lived in Kansas City for some time now, has mentioned this as an area of focus for him. Kevin O'Neill, who's been up and around for a while, I think a lot of us are saying, if we can do the greatest incentive of all to Kansas City business, which is getting rid of a heck of a lot of red tape, doesn't that actually solve the issues that we are really trying to address?
Now, you have said that you think this will be the most pro-business council that you've ever had, but you've also said you think it's the most progressive council you've ever had. A lot of people wouldn't put those two things together, so how do you square that?
Hey, you know what? I'm a guy, maybe I have Disney stock or something. I actually support the Republicans that used to, make up what I thought was in some ways kind of the core of the Republican Party, which is pro-business folks. And many of them helped me become mayor way back when. I hope you don't regret it. But people who said, actually, the best things we can do in government, whether local, state, or federal, is actually get rid of red tape, help stimulate business activity, and then to try to get important things done so that we can have a talented workforce, like investing in things like community college and vocational training programs. I think these days it's more of a progressive viewpoint. Right? When I think about progressive versus conservative viewpoints in modern America, the progressive viewpoint right now is to say, hey, businesses have the freedom of speech. What we're not going to do is try to restrict what a business can say, unlike what I think we're seeing in Florida and some other places. What we're not going to try to do is have the state or, God forbid, the federal government tell us what kids need to learn in school, unlike what we're seeing in places like Florida and increasingly on some challenge in Missouri and Kansas. So I actually think that the kind of pro-business freedom types of things that I grew up with, going to a private school on the state line or living in Hutchinson, Kansas for a while as a child, which were clearly Republican Party viewpoints of the early 1990s, have now morphed into the Democratic Party platform.
That's a conflation of a lot of issues there, Mr. Mayor. What businesses care about is whether or not they can function on, a low tax environment that is tax friendly to them and business friendly to grow their business. I mean, say what you want about the Disney thing. I understand it. But do you think this city council will advocate for lower taxes and less red tape? Because that's what this is going to come down to, not Disney nonsense.
Well, first of all, I actually love connecting it all. I think a lot of people sometimes say that everything's so drastically different. They do actually relate. But I will say this, yes, I think this council is a group that would say we don't need unnecessary, excessive regulations. Do you remember how easy it was for me to get rid of the liquor card requirement? It actually didn't take months and months of hearings. It took a lot of preliminary work up front. And so I think where we see issues of import, I think you will see that change. One exception area, of course, will probably be housing, where we're seeing more discussion on housing regulation. But no, I absolutely think that this progressive council, and it is the most progressive this city has seen, I think it's probably the middle of it is to my political left, which I know a lot of people think is super far left, but it really isn't that far to compare me to some others. But I think, we are going to see that level of potential change, and I think it will be good. And on taxation, I'm somebody who has not really supported many tax increases. We have had several bond elections, but I think we're trying to keep our tax burden fairly low so that we can address the needs of the people of Kansas City while not pricing them out of living in this town.
Well, speaking of taxes, one thing I saw that you tweeted here in the last couple of days, and it was after our conversation last week, you said a lot of sports talk this week. I look forward to watching the Chiefs, Royals, current, and Big 12 men's and women's basketball tournaments all playing in Kansas City, Missouri 1 decade from now. You didn't sound on the show last week like a guy that was super confident in the Royals playing in Kansas City, Missouri a decade from now. Has something changed in the last 6 days?
Well, I'm a big fan of the Pete Mundo morning show, and so I listened to you and Tony Batello's interview on Friday, which was just wonderful. I agreed with about 15% of it, but I think at some point during that chat there was this viewpoint that like the Royals to North Kansas City is some sort of fait accompli. And I think there's nothing further from the truth. I was at Chiefs training camp on Friday. I was there at the same time as Governor Mike Parson. I had a chance to talk to Chiefs team leadership. There really, I don't think, is much doubt right now that the Chiefs keep playing in Kansas City, Missouri for the long term. And we look forward to working with them to build, I think, what is a responsible investment to keep them here for another 2 generations. But I also think it's very positive for the Royals. I think the Royals continue to understand the downtown Kansas City story. I think that it's poppycock, this whole idea that the East Village is the most dangerous place ever, which if you actually go to it is largely vacant parking lots next to the police station. There's one filling station there, which is a problematic spot, but I'm pretty sure that gets bought out if something it goes in there that's substantial to that level. And so I think there's just a bunch of noise that's kind of thrown into this to, in a way, be part of a big PR campaign that we're seeing right now. I understand there's a North Kansas City PR campaign because Kansas City does what you would expect us to do. We negotiate professionally. We meet with the Royals ourselves directly, as I have on a number of different occasions, and I think we continue to do the work to make sure that there's a good deal for everybody. So, that's where I that's where I have a positive view. And I think people want to be in downtown Kansas City right now. Look no further than this, and I'll make this my last point on this. For the Women's Soccer World Cup, which generated its own set of controversy, there were people sitting in the Power and Light District at 5 a.m. on Sunday morning, 4 a.m. on Sunday morning, in the middle of downtown Kansas City. And if you've seen the demographic that goes to watch World Cup women's soccer games, they are not necessarily hardened folks that, let's say are used to being out on urban streets at 4:30 a.m. I mean that as respectfully as I possibly can, right? It was a bunch of folks from suburbs. It was a bunch of folks who were younger, a bunch of folks who are probably recent college grads who are comfortable in downtown Kansas City. It is a place that people want to be.
Well, on a similar note then, on the sports front, with the Big 12 expansion last week, how concerned are you that the Big 12 tournament could start bouncing around to Phoenix or Vegas or Salt Lake City or Orlando? And what can the city do on that front? And have there been any conversations on that issue?
So, as you know, conference realignment is probably like my favorite thing to talk about. It was actually the beginning of my Twitter career like a decade ago, talking about that with the Big 12. Do I have concern? I'm not going to lie. I have more concern today than I did maybe 2 months ago, but I don't have a lot. I mean, I have met with the Big 12 commissioner, Brett Yormark, who, I mean, my God, you talk about the shifting fortunes of the Pac-12 versus the Big 12. Let's go 7 or 8 years ago. This has been nothing short of exceptional work by Commissioner Yormark, by the presidents of the Big 12 member institutions, and a total failure by the Pac-12 and some sort of almost elite arrogance that they had in connection with how they were doing things. Do I have concern? Not really. The heart of the conference, the heart of the Big 12 continues to be close to Kansas City, despite the fact that the Big 12 doesn't play in Missouri at this point. You look at the schools, Iowa State, Kansas, kind of the blue blood brands of at least the basketball part of it. Arizona adds, I think, great talent, and, of course, the Texas schools. And so there can be debate about it, but here's the thing. Vegas has everything. You can never own Vegas. You can't own a weekend in Vegas. The story of Orlando is Disney World and other types of things, so I think even the sponsorship opportunities are somewhat different. You become basically subservient to whatever the heck Disney is doing that weekend. And Salt Lake City is a lovely place where everybody wants to go on a hike afterwards and really go to Park City. And so, it could, and by the way, has to figure out ways to drink at clubs and all that sort of stuff. So, it is something that we'll think about. Kansas City will always be competitive, but I think, look, we keep funding improvements to, for instance, the T-Mobile Center. We continue to do the work in the relationships with the Big 12. That's why I say book it here. Royals, Chiefs, Big 12, playing in Kansas City, Missouri, all of them a decade from now.
Well, he's confident, but still the most shocking thing the mayor said is that he agreed with 15% of what Tony and I talked about. I would have had the number closer to about 10 or 12%. So hit the over on that one, Mr. Mayor. Have a good rest of your week, and we'll talk to you next Thursday.
Hey, we'll talk to you next Thursday. Our agreement, Jackson County property taxes. That's all I'll say. We'll talk next week.
Plenty more to come on that front as well. He is the mayor of Kansas City, Quinton Lucas, on KCMO.